Imagine a world where you knew that you mattered and you belonged. The people cared about you because we were so darn good at listening to one another, no matter how different we are. That is what Sidewalk Talk is doing by putting listeners on sidewalks all over the world so that we can practice the art of connecting. Join me, founder and director Traci, as I interview experts on the fine art of human connection and interview some of our volunteers who've been listening on the sidewalk and even some of the folks that we've listened to. And if you want to volunteer, consider joining us at sidewalk-talk.org. Esther Boykin is a DC-based psychotherapist. She runs a group psychotherapy practice. She's also on frequently DC morning television, so you may know her name. And she has been one of the longest Sidewalk Talk chapter leaders outside of our original core group in California. And I'm proud to say a close personal friend. And for this month, we're going to feature many of our Sidewalk Talk leaders so that you can get a bird's eye view of who these folks are that sit out on the sidewalk or bring teams of people to sit out on the sidewalk. And it is a time of year where we start thinking about supporting nonprofits. So keep us in mind as you consider that if we can support all of our 92 chapter leaders that we now have, because we've doubled in size since last year at this time, doubled. And if we could get all 92 chapter leaders listening monthly, that is at minimum 11,000 people that we would be listening to monthly around the globe. Imagine the ripple effects of that. So mark your calendars. Giving Tuesday is on December 3rd, and enjoy this conversation with one of our earliest city leaders outside of California, Esther Boykin. I'm really excited to get to have this conversation with you because here we've gotten to know each other. You know, I still actually have fond memories of when you called me on the telephone. Well, you emailed me and then I called you. And then you were scrappy enough to say, hey, I'm touring colleges with my daughter. I'm going to be in San Francisco. Do you want to just meet in person?
Yeah.
And this is how this whole journey began. So folks, this is Esther Boykin, who it feels awkward to interview you because we've become friends. So it's weird.
Yeah. It's a little bit weird, but I like it.
In 2016 is when you kind of looked me up. So tell me, do you even remember how you heard about Sidewalk Talk?
I actually do. Sidewalk Talk is one of three pivotal relationships where it's both a professional relationship and I became friends with people that started on Twitter. That's
no
where
kidding.
That is where I first saw Sidewalk Talk. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then Googled it and found the website and emailed you. And the rest is history, right?
You must have really liked us because we were even scrappier then than we are now. So bravo to you.
I did.
So tell everyone a little bit about Esther Boykin and who you are and what you do in the world, because you don't just do Sidewalk Talk, and most people here at Sidewalk Talk are kind of active people. Tell us a little bit about your passions.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I run a private practice called Group Therapy Associates in the DC area. I am always doing a million things, which is part of the reason I think you and I are friends. I think we relate to the I'm passionate about 15 things and I like to do them all. I would say over the last year, probably the thing I'm most passionate about, besides Sidewalk Talk, is a project that I run called Therapy is Not a Dirty Word, which is, I like to think of is like the non-clinical arm of everything that I do in my private practice. So we do dinners and we do happy hours and we have a podcast, but really all about just sort of helping. I like to think of it as a two-way street, helping therapists get better at connecting with people outside their offices, but also helping people feel like they can connect to therapists in ways that are a little less intimidating, and just kind of changing the way we perceive therapy as this, I think sometimes it's like a very serious clinical place, and it is that sometimes, but it's also, I think it should also be warm and inviting and a place where people feel like they're being held. So I get to do lots of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, I can already imagine. I mean, there's a thread line to that in Sidewalk Talk too. I imagine that was part of
Yes.
what brought you to Sidewalk Talk. Because in the early days, it was all therapists that were out listening. It wasn't folks that were unlicensed. So I imagine that's part of it. What do you do at Sidewalk Talk? What's your role here?
I am the DC area city leader. So.
And do you know officially what who you are in the organization? You know that you're the first city leader that we had beyond that first month that we started.
Oh, yes. Well, I think I knew in the back of my head that I was like the first East Coast city leader, but I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah.
Yourself and Austin, and someone in Austin had come on board. We had LA and we had San Francisco, and LA came on board. It was attached to a film project, but you two were the first ones that contacted us, say, hey, I want to bring this to my community. You guys, it's kind of your fault actually that Sidewalk Talk is a thing, is what I'm saying. Okay. You're kind of the reason that this project is as big as it is, because you wanted to bring it all the way out there to the East Coast. So everyone that's listening, you have Esther Boykin to blame or to celebrate or to thank. Yeah.
I'm going to go with thanking because it's awesome.
So I want to get brass tacks here because we do want to have an impact, and there's a way in which I think sometimes folks can think that listening on a sidewalk is a really weird thing. So I'd like to hear, first of all, why do this? Why do you listen?
Oh, I'm going to get like very sappy, which I feel like to know me is to know that that's not, it's who I am, but not always how I say things. But I listen because I believe being heard feels like love. And I think our communities need way more of that in our experiences.
Yeah. It feels like there's a lot less of that going around these days. It feels like I don't experience as much love. I feel probably the number one thing I feel is fear. Right?
Yes.
Fear about paying the bills, fear about politics, fear about the environment. I don't think love is the centerpiece of much.
I don't either. And I think that's so much and I think when fear is the centerpiece, we disconnect.
Yeah.
In a sense, to feel like we're protecting ourselves or because it's too scary or, for any number of reasons. But I think fear leads to so much disconnection from the people we care about, from our communities, and I think ultimately from ourselves. Yeah. And so, for me, the listening and its connection to love just feels like what we need much more of everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to invite you to think about something with me, because you do this kind of cool connecting project with Therapy's Not a Dirty Word, which is in the safe confines of a nice restaurant or a fancy venue. And then Sidewalk Talk is the opposite of that. It's scrappy and camping chairs on the sidewalk. What might be valuable about sitting out in public spaces? Like what have you learned, or what has been interesting to you about sitting right out there on the street?
I think sitting out on the street, I think what I find maybe most valuable is that it prevents us from, in some ways, self-selecting the people we want to listen to or talk to. Because even in, like you said, like even in the events that I host, right, like it's framed in a particular way and I market it in a particular way and people see me. Like on the sidewalk, it's really about saying, I'm open to listening to anyone who, because we're just both here in this community. I don't know what you think politically. I don't know what your religious beliefs are. I don't know what your background is, but I'm willing to hear some of that if you're willing to share it. And I think to me, that's been some of the most kind of powerful experiences, is really listening to people who who's, when they tell me parts of their story, I think we would never cross paths except that I'm sitting here today.
Hmm.
I would have never know this person's story. And I think there's always something in people's story that there's just, even if it's just that moment of connection, of recognizing that even when we don't know people, even when we're super different, that there is a part of us that is still connected.
Hmm. Even if we
Yeah.
don't know each other, there's still a part of us that's still connected. I'm going to get a little philosophical with you. What do we lose as humans when we forget that? When we forget that even though we don't necessarily personally know each other, if we forget that there's a part of us that's still connected, what does this potentially mean for our mental health, for our pocketbook, for our politics, for our
Yeah.
planet? Like, what happens when we forget that we're connected to all these strangers walking around?
I think the thing we lose most is ourselves, right? Like,
Mm,
part is the sense of, part of how we define who we are in the world is about our connection to other people.
mm,
And so I think in terms of, certainly from a mental health standpoint, I think we, for me, it goes back to that feeling of disconnection, being disconnected from our own emotional experiences, feeling as though we are not part of a larger collective. And I think that in kind of modern times, definitely, I think particularly in America, we forget that. We discount the importance of belonging, um, to literally everything. When you feel as though you're part of something bigger, there's less loneliness. I think we feel more purpose in life. Um, yeah, we're more thoughtful about the choices we make, and I think that then trickles into everything else,
mm,
politics and
mm,
healthcare and environment, and you know all kinds of these sort of bigger things that I think we keep asking, like, oh, well, how do we fix these issues, or how do we
mm.
change the way we do it? And I think and that's probably a little bit of my therapist bias. That's part of the reason I became a therapist, is I believe that it's in our intimate connections, and like that we can expand the circle of people that we notice our connection to, and that changes the way we operate in the world.
Mm. So I'm hearing there's this interconnection and outer connection that leads to a greater sense of meaning and belonging that then makes us more intentional with what choices we make in our life.
Yeah.
Hmm. I was taking notes while I was listening to you so I could listen more deeply. It's really beautiful though. I think that's right. I think that's right on the money. Um, I'm curious, what the thing that always lights me up is when I get to hear from other folks that have listened in all different places around the world. Like even I just listened for the first time in my new home city on Monday night, and I didn't know what any of the listeners were sharing or hearing. And to hear some of the stories that they heard, or hear a little bit about what it was like for them, is so enriching for me. Like I almost feel connected just from hearing it all third party. And so I'm curious, what's been maybe your most memorable moment, either being a leader or listening on the sidewalk? What has been the most memorable? Is there a story that you can share?
Most memorable. I've had some really, in the last maybe month or two, I've had some really kind of just powerful stories. But I think most memorable was maybe 2 years ago. Um, I was listening. It was a young woman, I don't know, maybe in her early 20s. And, she was like, oh, this is really cool. And she talked about all kinds of just, uh, I hate to say mundane, but sort of mundane things, right? Like just kind of, it was like chit chat. Um, and then we were sort of wrapping up, and she was like, yeah, well, maybe next time I will talk to you about this mission trip I went on. And I said, sure. I kind of talked about, we'll be back. I said, I still have a few minutes if you want to tell me now. And she just told me about, she told me a lot of things that were very moving about her experience of being um, overseas in an area where there was a lot of refugees, um, and it was at a time where there was a lot of political discussion about it. I think what was most memorable for me, aside from her actual experiences and what she shared, was at the end, she thanked me for listening. And she said, it was one of the most life transforming experiences, but I haven't talked about it in over a year, because every time I would bring it up, people wanted to talk about the politics of it, the economics of it. Like, they wanted it to be an issue. She's like, this is the first time in over a year that I talked about it, and it was just about the people and like what it was like to be part of that community and to experience, their pain and their joy. And like, it was just about the people. And that, that always stuck with me in terms of thinking about like, I think that's part of what we're doing in our listening, is going like, yeah, I mean, there's lots to think about. There's lots to be philosophical about, and to kind of try to figure out, I don't know, problem solve issues, but what it means for someone to just feel like they're being heard and it's just about the people. And so sometimes I talk to volunteers about that. Like, our listening is about the person. It's not about their story. It's not about fixing. It's not about, all of these other things that sometimes we make things about. It's like, it's just about the people who show up.
Yeah. So why would this even be important in the world? Why would listening in a way to make it about people and be important? Some people think it's kind of a cute thing,
Yeah, I get that sometimes too. DC has its own interesting dynamic, neighborhood to neighborhood around that. But I think, everything we do is about people. I think we like to sort of, society sometimes likes to pretend like it's not, or that somehow we need to distance ourselves from emotion and from personal story in order to make these big important decisions or policies. And really, the whole point of all of the things that we do, the systems, the structures, should be about people. It is about people. And so the more we distance ourselves, the more disconnect we have from really understanding people's experiences, how can you make policy that's helpful? How can you make decisions about whether it's global policy, national, I don't know, decisions at your elementary school down the street, if you don't know people, if you're not interested in personal stories.
Yeah. So to me, what I'm hearing you say is that by centering connection in the stories of people, that we're more likely to make decisions that do right by all those people that we've been connecting with.
Yeah. And I think it broadens our worldview.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And it's, this episode is going to air during the month of November, which to all of our listeners, to mark your calendars, December 3rd is Giving Tuesday, and you will be getting some information. And we hope this story from Esther is just another reminder why this work is important. We're provoking out there on the sidewalk to remind folks that we can widen our embrace to people's stories that are really different than we are. And like what Esther said, that when we belong to something larger than ourselves, then we're more intentional with how we make choices or how we act or how we intervene on behalf of others. And I think it's the place that we start. It's so much nicer to do right by others when it comes from the heart, right? It comes from story and comes from knowing each other. I am so grateful that you've been here for this long. And I'm, I say this to you anyway. I don't need to say it on a podcast, but I am really grateful that we're still friends and that I consider you one of my new close girlfriends. So you're one of the people I call when stuff ain't good in my life. So thanks for listening to me often and many times.
Well, thank you for doing the same. And thank you for being such a good model. I mean, the feeling is totally mutual. And I genuinely feel like I'm both a better listener, but I think also I've gotten better at really sharing myself with the people I care about. And I credit you with some of that growth. with a lot of that growth, to be honest. You're very good at that.
You mean you're more vulnerable because of me?
I'm more vulnerable because of you. Sometimes I dislike that. Because, that's, listen,
I
like
know you
let's
do.
be honest.
I know. I was kind of going to tease you because, the difference in this interview, you start a lot of your sentences with I think,
Mm-hmm.
and I start mine with I feel. And
Yeah.
I just had to have a little chuckle about that as we were talking. I'm like, oh, that's totally Esther and Traci right there.
It totally is. But yeah, I'm grateful for the work that you do. Not just with Sidewalk Talk, but definitely with Sidewalk Talk. And also for being, it's so strange and lovely to be as close friends as we've become in just a few years, and really just because of this, which I feel like that in and of itself is like a testament to what Sidewalk Talk is really about.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of friendships that are formed inside this organization, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy day and with a cold to come talk with me. I appreciate it. And please come visit at Christmas time. Just make that plug now.
Just putting it out there. Okay. All right. All right.
All right.
I'm going to commit to sometime in the next 6 months.
All right. All right.
I'll be out there.
I guess I'll have to accept that. All right. Onward. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of the Sidewalk Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, tell your friends, tell your family, like and comment on the podcast publisher that you're listening from, and subscribe. This will help us get the word out about changing our culture to one of connection.